can all see in the window. And I call myself an occasional rule breaker. And that means that I don't always break the rules or break all of the rules, but I definitely break some of the rules some of the time. And so I think that's an important combination. And I'm going to go through some rules that I almost never break, a few rules that I almost always break, and some, I'm going to give you examples of other books where I think that this is why that rule break works, or places where I don't think breaking rules works very well. All right, so a little bit about me and why I think invited to do this webinar with you is this is the description of me if I were the perpetrator on a wanted ad about breaking the rules. I have 6 publishing contracts. Those of you who are here are probably scratching your head because you've heard about 5 of them. You're the first people to know that I actually have sold a 6th book. It's not announced yet. So watch for even more good news in the next few weeks, probably. I don't know always when these things are going to be announced publicly. But I also have loads of unpublished manuscripts, which is probably a lot like similar to most of you. If you've ever participated in Picture Book Idea Month or 12 by 12, or there's actually a Picture Book Writing Month. I participated years ago, but in write a picture book a day. And I did this the first year that I decided I wanted to write picture books. So I have this just gobs of files of picture books, unpublished. Some of them are never going to be published. But I also have occasionally defiant attitude and non-compliance toward the rules of writing, because I think that too many rules can stifle a writer. And I do have a secret agent in crime, and her name is Karen Grunsick, and she helps assist me in my rule-breaking debauchery. So this is just the sort of reasons why I think I was invited to talk to you, why I'm kind of maybe an expert on talking about rules, learning them, and then breaking them. All right, so I'm a former teacher. So I'm going to start with an activity because I believe about turning it on you. So here's your first activity that I want you to do, is I want you to write yourself a fun bio. I just wrote a bio of myself if I were on a wanted poster for breaking the rules of picture books. So take any kind of theme or fun thing that you want to do and write yourself a fun bio. This is a way that you can take the rules. You know, bios are supposed to be stuffy or professional. We're going to turn that on its head right away. So in your bio, please include 1 to 2 points that you'd use in an actual professional bio of yourself, but you can't be boring or buy the book. So in my bio, I told you I had these publishing contracts and then I had an agent. Those are sort of professional things I would put in my bio, but I made them fun and I used the language of being an outlaw. So do that too. You can pick a theme if you want, but then your bio must be short. And so if you think Twitter bio, I just pulled up Tara Lazar's, and Tara Lazar has Funny Author Lady of the Monster, with more books coming, 2015, 16, 17, Mom, or Mom, Foodie, Handy Capable, Herpy read 'em, sees the books, New Jersey, not Joycey. So in a very, very short space of time, she's told us a lot about herself professionally. She shared a little bit personally, and I think that it just works to bring a personality out. And that's important. We write books for kids, so it's important to kind of be creative and maybe have a fun bio. You may never use this bio, but go ahead. You know, obviously the activities are for you. You know, they're not really for all of us, but it's a fun activity to get started. All right, but now I guess we're going to go on to applying that same idea of creativity, taking something, turning it on its head to picture book manuscripts. We're going to take a look at a lot of picture books. You are going to get the titles of the picture books that I talk about in a bibliography, but what you're not going to get in the bibliography are some of the details that I share about the particular books. So you may want to take a few notes. All right, I'm going to start with what I call a paradox, and that's creativity with boundaries. The activity that I just gave you was write a bio of yourself, but by giving you a limitation to make it short and to make it fun, I gave you boundaries. I gave you limits. And usually I find that students or writers have a freedom when they're given boundaries. And so when we think about rules, sometimes it's actually a really good thing that we have these rules of writing, because otherwise we would have endless ideas and we'd never filter them, or we'd never get anywhere meaningful. So I feel there's a freedom when creating within certain limits or parameters. Maybe that's just me, but I'm going to start with some rules that I almost never break. And this is me personally. So from the handout that you're going to get of the 50 picture book writing rules, these are some that I almost never break. The first rule that I never break is hiring my own illustrator. I'm sure that a lot of you on this webinar already know this, but if you don't, and you're a writer and not a professional artist, you do not have to worry about making a professional dummy or hiring an artist to work with. Okay, that is a rule I never break. And so I always wanted to start with that very simple rule for everybody here. All right, rule number 22 is something I also don't break at the submission stage. So when I submit something to my agent, or usually when it's going out to an editor, I don't say this is going to be on page 5, this is spread 6 or 7. I don't label the page numbers on my manuscripts for how they're going to be laid out in a 32-page picture book. I don't, just for the reason that I want to make sure that the story as a whole flows, and I will do that often later. We will paginate the book later after an editor has interest, but I don't do it right away when I'm writing the book or in submission stage. I'll do it myself as an activity in a revision stage, but I'll put it back looking just like this. So what you see on the screen is an actual excerpt from one plastic bag that I had submitted. This is the way that it looked, part of a page, when I submitted it to the editor who ended up buying the book. So you can see that I just use indentations for paragraphs. Sometimes I will make the words dance a little on the page, but I didn't say that, okay, this is spread, 6, 7, this is on page 8, this is on page 9, and this line is on page 10. I didn't do that. I almost never do that until it's at the point that an editor wants to acquire it or asks for that specifically. I also don't break rule number 23. I can't think of a time that I've ever broken this rule. And this is that whatever you're writing about, whether it's an adult character, whether it's a learning topic or a science topic, I tend to like nonfiction. I always include a universal experience or emotion that a child can relate to. I think about who my audience is. So if I'm writing for a 5-year-old boy, that's my son in the picture. If I'm writing for a 5-year-old boy like my son, I remember that when I think, what would a 5-year-old want to know about the water cycle? Or how would an 8-year-old react to a woman who is cleaning up the trash in her village? And I think about those kind of things of where the child is at and where the character of my story is at, and make sure that there's an overlap, that the child can either see themselves in the book or can understand what is happening in the book. They can relate to that. That goes along with that agency or that likability, sympathetic to character, but really having that feeling or emotion in there that a child can relate to. That's one rule that I can't think of any great picture book that breaks that rule. Another rule that I always stick to is that the book must have a structure, format, or pacing that builds anticipation and gives the book a rhythm that keeps moving forward. The thing that defines the picture book genre really is that page turn. And so often I see a great story, but it's more of a static magazine story, something that you might sit down and just read out loud in one sitting. It doesn't necessarily invite the page turn. And one thing that helps for me is because I'm a mom and a former teacher, I also had 1 year as a librarian in a school, is that when you have to sit up in front of a group of kids and read a book, you're very aware of how long a book is, how the pacing works, and whether or not those kids are engaged. So try to always keep moving things forward is something that I keep in mind. Because parents, teachers have to read this out loud. So think about that structure or format that that paces a book and keeps it moving forward. 39 and 47 are two rules that have to do with grammar and spelling and punctuation and formatting that are really just sort of those professional cleanup type of rules. I actually have a whole course at the Children's Book Academy that addresses this. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I run a website called Your Story. And one of the things that we see constantly is inconsistent tenses. A story will start in the present tense saying, Sammy goes to school. He finds a pen, and then it will all of a sudden slip into past tense. Look, I found a pen, he said. It will, just you have to pick one or the other. And the same thing with knowing how to format a manuscript. I showed you a few slides back how to do double spacing, size 12 font, indexing paragraphs. It's pretty simple, but if you're not sure, or English is not your first language, or you're really bad at those grammar, then a course like that might be something you want to look at, because maybe Ariel can address this later. But seeing even a spelling error in your title or a typo in the first line can really hurt your chances, even if it's a great story. I think that if there's multiple errors, even if they're small, they're going to stick out. You're just going to stick out. So I always try to make sure that my grammar, my proofreading is spot on in the manuscript. All right, are we ready to break some rules? We are going to kick butt and take names. All right, here's the biggest rule. This is rule number 1, and I listed it as rule number 1 for a reason. I'm hoping that everyone back at home is cheering about this, about me going to talk about breaking this rule, that picture books must be under 500 words. Because here's what I sort of want to say to that. Hogwash. They do not have to be under 500 words. And I'm going to share with you some books that are not. And one thing that I want to focus on is recently published books. I know that Mira brought up a lot of wonderful classic books. I want to talk about getting your book published in this current market. So I am going to focus on mostly titles published in the last 5 years, a few titles within the last 7 or 8 years. But mostly I'm going to focus on recently published titles in the last 5 or up to 10 years. So here, what is one reason you might write a book that's longer than 500 words? Well, if you're writing a nonfiction book or historical fiction book, I would say you need to give yourself a little bit more leeway depending on the subject of your book. There are certainly nonfiction or historical fiction books that are under 500 words, but these books that you see on the screen here are longer than 500 words. For example, Papa's Mechanical Fish, which is by Candace Fleming and is illustrated by Boris Kulikov, is 1,031 words. If you take The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind by William Kamkwamba and Brian Mueller, illustrated by Elizabeth Zunon, that book is 1,351 words. And that was published in 2012. Papa's Mechanical Fish was published in 2013. Henry's Freedom Box was published in 2007, and it is 1,260 words. Henry's Freedom Box is by Ellen Levine and illustrated by Kadir Nelson. And then you have my debut book, One Plastic Bag, that I've listed for you. And the reason why I highlight that it's a debut is because I was unpublished before this. It is 833 words, and it's being published in 1 week. So if you're writing historical or nonfiction, the 500-word rule, I don't want to say it doesn't apply to your book, but sometimes to get the context and the story information in, allow yourself, up to 100, 1,000, or maybe even 1,500 words, depending on your subject matter. Now, what about fiction? There are plenty of great fiction novels that are more than 500 words. Okay, I'm just going to go through some of them for you here. Cowboy Boyd and Mighty Calliope, which was published in 2013. It's by Lisa Mosier and illustrated by Sebastian Van Doornik, is 710 words. And I'm just going to start by reading you a little excerpt from that book. Okay, so Cowboy Boyd and Mighty Calliope. I'm going to tell you that excellent pacing is one reason why you'll see that if a pacing or a rhythm is set up, those 710 words can really fly by and it doesn't seem so long. So here's how it begins. No doubt about it, folks knew Boyd and Calliope were different the moment they rode onto the Double R Ranch. That's the shortest horse I've ever seen, said Slim. That's the dustiest horse I've ever seen, said Hardtack. That's the lumpiest horse I've ever seen, said Rancher Rose. She's a rare one, said Boyd. Raised her myself. You can see right away from the second page, there's going to be a pacing or a structure that repeats throughout the book that makes that anticipatory feeling in kids that they know, hey, we're going to have three people react every time there's a situation. And so 710 words really flies by. Now, this is a book where his horse or his steed is a rhino. So an interesting concept, too, when we were talking about taking something and flipping it on the head. If you've not seen this book, Sophie Squash by Patsy Law Miller, 694 words. 694 words, published in 2013, and recently won the Golden Kite Award for the SCBWI. This book doesn't feel long when you're reading it. It is a book that can be read to the very young. You can read this book to a 4-year-old and it doesn't appear to be long, yet it's 694 words. So there's an example of another book. You'll also see I have listed The Day the Crayons Quit by Drew Daywalt. 999 words. Okay, 999 words. That book, I think the reason why it is so, that it's okay that it's long, is that it has such engaging language. It's snarky, it's funny, it's different, but the language, the verbs, the words, the diction that is chosen is great. Same with the one next to it, Billy Twitters and His Blue Whale Problem. This is by Mac Barnett, illustrated by Adam Rex. And this book is 936 words. 936 words. So again, using excellent language. In one spread, Tilby Peel gets stuck in the blowhole of the whale. It's funny. It's very engaging. I've seen kids just roaring, laughing at this book. So again, excellent pacing, engaging language, and then also books for older readers. So you'll notice that I have Grace for President listed on here by Kelly DiPuccio, illustrated by Win Pham. And if you take this book, it sets up the electoral college system and kind of teaches kids that through a narrative. Obviously, kids in pre-K and kindergarten aren't really going to read this book. It's geared for first grade, second grade, third grade, even fourth grade, who are learning about U.S. government, can use this in a classroom setting. It's just meant for a slightly older reader than that 3 to 6 age range that many people are saying picture books should be geared for now. If it's geared for a little bit older than that 3 to 6-year-old range, you might need more than 500 words because an older reader is going to expect a meatier story. Same thing with Penny and Her Marble. Grace for President is 1,367 words. I just wanted to point that out. And it was published in 2008. Penny and Her Marble by Kevin Henkes just came out in 2013. That book is 876 words. And I'll point out that I would categorize Penny and Her Marble as a early chapter book. It's not quite a chapter book as most people think about it, but it's a picture book that's broken up sort of into chapters. So it falls in that maybe easy reader or independent reader, just before chapter book, one of those gray area categories. Yet it's still illustrated. Every page is illustrated in Penny and Her Marble. So it is very much a picture book, but for maybe an independent reader. And at 876 words, this book is fabulous. It's just so well written, and I'm a big Kevin Henkes fan. But I wanted to point out, you'll actually get on your bibliography a few more books that are above 500 words so that you can see it. But these are some reasons that you might give yourself some leeway if you think that if you think you've done one of these things, such as really took care at the pacing, thought about the language, if you're writing for a slightly older reader than that 3 to 6 age range, allow yourself to have more than 500 words. All right, so you're probably wondering, well, how do I know how many words are my favorite books that I like to read? This is a link that I go to quite often just to check on the word count of books that are published. You're probably not going to be able to find really recently published books, within the last 6 months, but maybe, a year or more. You should be able to find some of the popular books on the Renaissance Learning Quiz Store. You just go to the link, click on the quiz store, and type in the title of the book, and it'll have the word count will appear right on the screen. So you can sort of gauge how long some of the stories that you read or that you like, how long are they really in terms of the count versus having to count them yourself. All right, so I'm going to go ahead to another rule that I do break or don't break sometimes. This is one that I sometimes break and sometimes I don't. And that is, don't put a lot of illustrator notes in your manuscript. When I started out, I heard Alan Johnston of Beach Lane Books speak, and he said, don't ever, ever put an illustrator note in your manuscript. And I went, oh my goodness. I went home and deleted all my illustrator notes out of like every manuscript I ever wrote. And I submitted like that for a long time. My first 2 books that I had published had no illustrator notes whatsoever. And One Plastic Bag, even though it was about a real person and there were maybe some things I wanted to explain, for me, when writing it, keeping them out of the manuscript made sure for me that I was writing very vividly. Now, Water is Water, which is a book of mine coming out in May, is 147 words, and I submitted it with 0 illustrator notes, which was super scary for me in one way because I had such a clear vision in my head of how I wanted that book to look. But I was, Alan Johnson and a couple other editors' voices were ringing in my head. So I deleted them all out and sent it to my agent. And my agent said it didn't need any illustrator notes, that there was so much possibility and richness there in the poem. It's a rhyming book and it's a poem that an illustrator and an editor would easily see some possibilities for illustration. So my first 2 books I submitted have no illustrator notes. Since then, I've gotten a little bit more, I've written some books that needed illustrator notes, partially because what is happening on the page is nowhere in the text or the opposite of what's happening in the text. So Helping Hands, which is a game it's a game and a book hybrid that's coming out next January or February. That book I put 1 illustrator note before the manuscript just to set up that it was a game, and that it was pretty obvious in the way that I did it that the page turns were going to be sort of the breaks where you would find out the answers. But I wanted to set it up, and so I was very clear, even before my manuscript started, right above the title, I put my illustrator note about the concept of the book. And then I had just 1 very brief illustrator note within 1 of the pages in there. 10 Little Ninjas was a little bit more complicated because the characters in that book are doing some things that are opposite of what the text is saying. And the text is very sparse on that one too. I think it's about 250 words, maybe not even. And so because the text is so sparse on that one, I did put in an illustrator note. My most recent sale, Are We Pairs Yet, which was just announced, I have tons of illustrator notes. That whole manuscript is lined with illustrator notes. One, because the book is entirely in dialogue. I have never had a book before. This is really my only manuscript I have that is written all in dialogue. But this one is all dialogue, and there's a lot of things that happen and wordless spreads in the book where I'm depending on the illustrator to draw what is happening because there are no words. And so that is why that book is very illustrator note heavy. I have a resource link on the bottom. I don't know if you want to copy it down, but Susanna Leonard Hill, who is fantastic, she's a great teacher. She has an article, How Do You Handle Illustrator Notes in Picture Book Manuscripts. There's a little talk about that on her blog. So if this issue comes up for you about illustrator notes, take a look at her blog as well. Okay, one more rule here. Don't include a moral or a lesson. Okay, so including a moral or a lesson in books, I'm going to give you some examples of some books that do, in my opinion, include a moral or a lesson. Ben Rides On, which is by Matt Davies, that came out in 2013. It really has a couple of messages in there. It deals with bullying. First of all, Ben, his bike is stolen by a bully. And when he gets his bike back, it's broken. And he's very upset. And all he can think about is getting even. So there's our second moral or lesson dilemma that we're brought into is bullying, but then also getting even. Ben, when he's walking, he hears a noise and he realizes that the big kid who stole his bike and ruined his bike is literally dangling off a cliff and he's in perilous danger. And Ben is faced with the situation of being smug and enjoying the fact that his nemesis is in perilous danger, or to take the nagging feeling inside his conscience and go help the bully and bring him up. Well, he decides he's going to do the right thing, and he helps the bully, and then the bully takes his bike and goes away again. And at the ending, you'll see that there's a nice and tidy conclusion that really wraps it up with this moral or this lesson. However, it's not heavy-handed, and I'll get into that a little bit more. So I think that the reason it works is because the moral or lesson is there, but it's implicit. It is not explicitly stated, and the moral of the story is, and this is what you should do. And Matt Davies does a really good job in letting Ben be sassy by revealing his thoughts about wanting that bully to hang there in perilous danger. There's even the smirk on his face in the illustration. That really touches upon that idea of getting even in kids. And so he doesn't just play it that, Ben always does the right thing. He really puts the dilemma back and forth within the illustrations and the text. Another book that I've got listed here is The Sandwich Swap by Kelly Bacuccio and Queen Reina Alabella of Jordan. And that was in 2008. Obviously, this book is about friendship. It's about getting along. It's about trying new things. But because it's so character-driven and so plot-driven, it's not told from a perspective of here's what you should do. You should always, like and try everybody else's food, and it's okay to be different, and global peace and all of that. It's very character-driven, and I think that's important. If you have a moral or a lesson, it should just naturally unfold from the characters and the scenario in the story. You already heard about how Martha saved her parents from green beans. You heard a little bit about that. Again, it's a moral or a lesson book about picky eaters and about eat your vegetables. But when you have green beans swaggering into town with their cowboy hats on, and literally she has to bite their heads off and cause their demise, it's a way in which the moral or lesson is sort of turned on a head with humor, with action, with adventure, and it's never didactic, outright in that way. Now, this is not my hat. Some of you may be scratching your head. This is not my hat by John Clausen. Some people might think this is a horrible example of something that would include a moral or a lesson. But I think the reason that this works so well is because we don't have a likable main character, that at the end, we need to see that character meet swift justice. And so because it starts with him doing something bad, the ending really brings forth a moral in that, he supposedly, you can interpret it as he gets eaten. I mean, that's what happens. You steal a hat, you're going to get eaten. So there is a moral or a lesson in there, but it's done in such a way that is so dark or is so opposite or is implicit, is never stated at all, that you can get away with it. You can get away with having a moral or a lesson. So those are some examples. I also have The Very Inappropriate Word by Jim Tobin, illustrated by Dave Coverly. And this book is about a kid, just like Mira had an example of, I think, an older title, Albert's Bad Word. It's a newer version, published in, I believe, 2012 or 2013. And The Very Inappropriate Word is about a boy who picks up a very inappropriate word and starts using it at school. But I think that it can happen is because it's funny and it's really engaging language. and it's not hit you over the head. When you read the ending of this book, you'll see why. It doesn't wrap up with a tidy moral or lesson. I also have a link from kidlit.com, just a brief thing about why you shouldn't moralize in books. I mean, when we moralize, we're really putting on a grown-up hat instead of thinking about that universal experience for the child. And the best books do teach us goodness, but they don't do it on purpose. As in, through the text, that's the main purpose of the text. So story first, and moral or lesson should unfold naturally. All right, are we ready for an activity? What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you turn a moral or a lesson on its head. So you want to make a list first. Step one is just quickly with your pen and paper, make a list of popular morals or themes for kids, things that come up constantly in kids' books, such as, picky eaters, eat your vegetables, sharing with other kids, accepting yourself, or learning to accept others' differences. So if you want to quickly jot down just 2 or 3, really popular morals or themes that kids should learn. I'm wagging my finger because that's what, I think of with morals or themes. Write a few down. That's part 1. Then what you're going to do is circle one of those moral-related topics from your list. So maybe I chose picky eaters, for example. Let's say I chose picky eaters as one of those things. I want to teach kids not to be so picky. And then what you're going to do, though, is you're going to turn that moral or lesson on its head in step 3. Step 3 is to change the moral or the lesson, which states the opposite of the norm. Or you're going to write a little pitch for that book where the character or the section calls for a completely different moral or a super extreme one, like a hyperbole. Okay, so for example, if you take little P, it takes it on the head because normally it's eat your vegetables. And in little P, it's eat your dessert, eat your candy. Okay, and little P doesn't want to eat candy because he wants spinach so bad because spinach is the dessert. So it just sort of takes the norm and flip-flops it. With Runaway Mummy, we put a setting here where they're monsters. I mean, they're mummies. And in the Runaway Mummy, here, I'll just read a page for you. I'll give you an example from the Runaway Mummy here. It's just like the Runaway Bunny, but instead of being so sweet, it's kind of dead and gross. Okay, once there was a little mummy who wanted to run away. If you run away, said Mother Mummy, I will get you, for you are my rotten little mummy. If you try to get me, said the little mummy, I will turn into a serpent that lurks at the bottom of the sea. If you turn into a serpent, said Mother Mummy, I will become a sea monster that will wrap around you and never let go. So you can see how this parallels the I love you theme with all of the gruesome things that a mother mummy will do to her kid if her kid runs away. So again, just sort of taking that moral, spinning it on its head or giving it an extreme situation. And then also Amy Krause Rosenthal is sort of the queen of rule breaking here at Bedtime for Mommy. So if you take, a childhood moral like, okay, you got to get to bed, it's bedtime, you want to teach your kids to get to bed on time, here, now it's bedtime for Mommy. So it's the opposite. And the kid is making sure mom gets to bed on time. So the character and the setting here is just flip-flopped. So think about it for a little bit. Make some popular morals or themes for kids, step 1. Choose one, and then try to come up with an idea in which you just flip-flop the moral in some way, or where there's a different norm, or it's really extreme, that you make the moral almost so extreme that it's humorous or funny or fresh or new. Ariel, have you published some books like this where it flips a moral or a lesson sort of in a brand new angle? I know Little P, did you guys do Little P, right? Yeah.
Yes, Little P and that whole series are they're chronicle books, and Amy Krause Rosenthal is just wonderful for that kind of thing. Trying to think of other examples.
Do you have one chronicle where like the fish gets eaten at the end, or just? I'm trying to think what it was a while ago, like maybe like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Just one where like in the end, like the moral is like don't eat your friends or something. I want to say it's a chronicle book, but I can't think of the title.
Well, I think Carnivores is a little bit like that, but that's pretty new. That came out just last year, and it's hilarious and does kind of play with morality. I'll actually talk about it a little bit in my talk later.
I'm going to get back to some more rules and a little bit more about this teaching and didacticism idea, because I see that a lot of people approach picture books from wanting to teach something. They really want to teach something, whether it's context or content material, a subject, or they want to teach a value or a moral and instill goodness in kids. I see this a lot as a starting place for picture books. So I'm going to go through and talk about the D word, didacticism, in just a second here. Let me get my thing back up, underwear already. Okay, rule number 7 is don't teach some or write didactically. And when I teach new writers this, they go, that's exactly what I wanted. It's in which so-and-so learns a lesson about, or so-and-so transforms about. And so I highly encourage you to read Agent Jennifer Loughran. I don't know how to say her last name, but she's known as Literati Cat online. She has a blog, and she had a post in 2012 about the D word and why it's important not to be overly didactic or teaching in your writing. Now, that said, there are several manuscripts, or books, I should say, they're not manuscripts anymore, published that teach something fantastic. And they do it in very, very key ways. One of them here that I have is Being Frank by Donna Earnhardt. I want to highlight that this was her debut book. This was her first book. And it definitely teaches a lesson. It is about a boy who says whatever is on his mind, even if it's not very nice. And so he's Frank, hence his name, Frank. It was published in 2012 by Flashlight Press. And it is hilarious. I remember reading this with my kids outside at the picnic table, and we were just laughing so hard at the situations in the book. So why do I think it works that in this book, where Frank learned how to maybe not express all of the things that he's thinking in his head out loud, he learns to filter some of the things and the way that he says things to people. How do I think she gets away with such a lesson or a moral or teaching something through this character? And the first reason I think that it's so successful is because it is character driven. I know Mira has an entire course at Children's Book Academy about character driven picture books. And I think that is one way in which this book succeeds, is it is really character driven. The character and the story come first in this book. It's also got humor. And if you can throw in humor, I think that's just a plus across the board. Everyone loves to laugh. Kids love to laugh. It is harder to do than it sounds, is to include humor. But it is something that can help if you have sort of a didactic or lesson or something to teach. Throwing in some humor can really help. And then I also just think it's vivid writing. I can tell that it's very tightly written, that it was refined, it was very polished. It's just vivid writing, good verbs, good pacing. And so Being Frank by Donna Earnhardt is one of those books that takes all of the storytelling rules, really just is a shining example. And it happens to be an issue book or a teaching book in some ways. So that's a successful example. So if you know that you're the type of person who wants something in your book, take a look at some of those books, like Being Frank. Here are some other keys to breaking the rule. If you want to teach something in your book, here are some other things that I think in analyzing books that teach, these are some of the keys, that you're subtle about it. Okay? You're very subtle in terms of it's not at the forefront of, here's what you're going to learn. This is about XYZ. It has to be subtle, maybe even a little sneaky. Fiction books do this all the time. They reveal facts about animals or characters through things that naturally unfold. So that word sneaky could also be sort of natural. Think about things naturally unfolding. Creativity. Be creative. That is one way that you can learn how to impart knowledge. I think of No Monkeys, No Chocolate, which is by Melissa Stewart, and I have it here. Here. Melissa Stewart and Alan Young, illustrated by Nicole Long. Now, I know this book was like many years in the making, but it's published by Charles Bridge, I believe. Let me just double check that before I say that. Charles Bridge, yes. So no monkeys, no chocolate. So right away, um, at the beginning, you have these little worms in a comic strip on the bottom of every page. So this book, which teaches kids how chocolate comes, it takes every step in making chocolate, all the way from the forest or the rainforest to the birthday table. It teaches them how chocolate comes, every step along the way, and how everything in nature is intertwined. But in the bottom of every page, you've got these creative little characters that are funny, and they say things like, "This book is making me hungry. I need a snack. Hey, you'll spoil your dinner. Mind your own bookworm business." And so they're just kind of snarky, they're kind of funny, and they add in some of the key information at a couple of points in the story. So think about being creative. I mean, it's got a main text of the story, and then it's got this side thing going on. Well, a Magic School Bus sort of pioneered that, um, a couple decades ago. And so that's something to think about: is be creative in your approach. Story comes first. Think about how to babysit a grandpa. It's a how-to book. It's sort of trying to give you instructions. It's trying to teach a kid how to babysit a grandpa, which in the first place is sort of a silly idea, because why do kids need to know how to babysit a grandpa? It's one of those turn it on a head ideas in the first place, but it really goes through all the steps, and it's written as a how-to book. So you could break the rule in writing a how-to book. You're literally teaching kids how to do something, but you pick something with humor or whimsy, and then it has this great story of Grandpa coming over and everything that happens while he's over, and it ends when he has to leave. So there's an idea of a tidy sort of story within that how-to instruction. I think the key for all of the books and breaking this rule is to turn off your grown-up lens. So what I mean by turn off your grown-up lens means that idea of, I need to teach this, or I need to teach it in that way, or I want to make sure kids understand. If we start from that point of being a grown-up and we don't go back to our 5-year-old self or our 6-year-old self, then we're really going to be teaching. The way that I think about it is that my kids every day, they're both in school now, um, and they go to school for 6 hours a day where they're being told what to do, how to do it. Before school, they're being told, hurry up, let's get out the door, eat your breakfast, put on your shoes, get your backpack. When they come home, there are rules at home, about how they can't do this or can't do that. And they're constantly being taught or told what to do and how to be. And if books are also like that, why would they even want to read books? So turn off the grown up lens, come back to, what would I want to read if I were a kid? What questions about this subject would I be interested in? And that's the thing. The things that are fascinating to me about chocolate aren't the same things that are maybe fascinating to my 5-year-old about how chocolate is made. And so turning off that grown up lens and thinking, what would a child be interested in on this topic, would be a key to breaking that rule. And so lots of revision is obviously part of it. Um, Usually books are years in the making. No Monkeys, No Chocolate. Melissa Stewart, who is the author, has a timeline on her website of how many years that the research and putting this book together and the concept came together. So obviously there's lots of revisions. Then you need a fresh, clear concept. And I say fresh because I think that it needs to be different. It needs to stand out in some way, whatever you're trying to teach. If you're trying to teach about, if it's an ABC book, if it's a, shapes book, if it's about some kind of science concept such as the water cycle, you need to take a fresh approach on it, but it also needs to be really clear what you're accomplishing. So that one sentence pitch activity that I had you do, I think is very important, especially if you're going to try to impart some kind of knowledge or information, that your book has a really clear concept. You could describe it in one sentence. And then you have to choose the exact right format for the book. So for No Monkeys, No Chocolate, it's a little bit longer because it's for a little bit older readers. And it has this format where, how do you get, humor into a book where she got, cocoa leaves can't survive without cocoa stems. She goes through each part or each step in the forest, the format really with these right in the corner, these little worms narrating the thing or commenting, almost like what are those two Muppets who always, talk back and forth, is just the right format for the book. So you have to think about the way in which you write the book is just as important as what you write because they need to all work together. And those, I think, are the keys to breaking the teaching rule. Because as a former teacher, as someone who likes nonfiction and science and environmental topics, I feel that my books do teach. But I think that these words that I have on the side of the screen here are what's always in my mind if I've got a subject matter or a lesson, so to speak, that is somewhere in my book. But the rule, okay, I'm just going to read for you. Rule number 10 is delete no words. Things like hate, stupid, jerk, toilet humor. Is that we all hear there's all these things that you cannot have it in a picture book manuscript. I hear all the time what words we can't use or what words is going to flag an editor or they're going to have an editorial meeting about this. And maybe Ariel can talk more about that. But I'm just going to talk about some picture books that use these controversial words or toilet humor and or maybe it's not even toilet humor, it's just talking about poop. So that you can realize that there are books that do this, that have gotten away with this. And I don't know how I feel about this particular one. I'm just pointing it out for you. Is that back in 1995, The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales by John Cheska kind of, got the ball rolling on the word stupid, which is, what some teachers, some parents, some librarians call the S word and don't let kids say this. And here it is on the title of the book. If you take the book with no pictures, which Mira did bring up before, that book has a page in it where he says boo-boo butt. Butt is an okay word in my house, but I know that in my niece and my three nieces' house, they're not allowed to say the word butt. They have to say bottom or something like that. So I'm just putting it out there that, hey, the word butt, meaning your butt, is in there. Unicorn Thinks He's Pretty Great, which is by Bob Shea and came out in 2013, has the words dopey, darn, and stupid. So it has all three of those words in there. And so I just thought I'd point that out. I think it's a hilarious book, but it does have those words in it. The Chicken of the Family by Mary Amato, which I think is a hilarious book. It was published in 2008, and it has the word dumbhead and dumbheads a couple of times in there, where one sister calls the other sister a dumbhead. And so, to me, I have two kids. I hear words that I don't want to hear at home. I think it's realistic, but it may be something that was a flag for other people. Poop. Okay, we had nose picking, I think, in the comments before. We had, boogers and nose picking. I didn't give a nose picking example because I just don't have a good one. But poop in all its form, there's a whole book by Lisa Morlock called Track That Scat. Came out in 2012, and it's about all kinds of animal poop and all the different words for it. And literally, they're tracking it. They're trying to figure out what poop belongs to what animal. I think it's really clever, really creative. Kids are interested in the kinds of things that maybe they're not allowed to talk about under other circumstances. Neil Harry to the Moon has toilet in there, where I think he wants to flush his brother down the toilet. So again, just literally toilet humor in there. Frankenstein. You can see it's the second image here. Frankenstein. Oh, I'm sorry. Neil Harry to the Moon is by Robbie Harris, and it was published in 2008. Frankenstein came out in 2013. It's by Samantha Berger and illustrated by Dan Santat. Has the word hate in it. And I emailed Samantha Berger about this because it's such a recent title and it has got a sequel as well. It also got a board book version. And Samantha told me that she took a lot of heat for the word hate in there, and it was actually taken out of the board book edition. So when they made an edition for younger readers, they took the word hate out of the book. So just, again, I don't really have an opinion either way on these, but I wanted to point them out so that you're aware that these rules exist or that people are talking about them, and, you can break them or you can choose to play it safe. And then underwear. There's 1,000,001 books of underwear. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with talking about underwear. I think it's a good thing. Throw underwear in there with any kids' books, but we've got One Big Pair of Underwear by Laura Gell, and that just came out in the fall of 2014. And wouldn't you know it, it's illustrated by Tom Lichtenheld, who does a lot of Amy Krauss Rosenthal books as well. So that's just my take on some of the no-no words. I don't think, oh, you know what, I do have a no-no word in Are We Pairs Yet, and we'll see if that stays or goes. So I'm not sure yet on that one. All right, we're going to talk about a really serious rule that I hear all the time. All right, then I'm going to talk very quickly about rhyme, because I think this is the last one that I have here, is that editors don't like rhyme. And I want to point out Dory Chaconis. Dory Chaconis has an article called Icing on the Cake. And she says, I don't know how the rumor about editors not liking rhyme got started, but I've learned that's all it is, a rumor. And I happen to know Dory and most of the people in her critique group. And within 3 years, their group of 7 sold 36 picture books and 27 were in rhyme. So editors do buy rhyme, but why do they say they don't want it? Is that it's a lot of work. The rhyme is a lot of work to get it right. And I'm just going to illuminate very quickly an example from Water is Water on what kind of editing has to go into rhyme if you want to write rhyming books. So this is 24 words from Water is Water from the original manuscript, my original rough draft, or finalized version, I guess. Glide, slide, winter is calling, ice is ice unless ice is falling. Stack, snap, throw out a thwack. Snow is snow until spring is back. Okay, so that's the original. I want to show you, after editing and polishing, what the final looks like. And this is just 24 words. Keep that in mind. Glide, slide, put on the brakes. Ice is ice unless it forms flakes. Pack, stack, shape it and smack. Snow is snow unless spring comes back. Now those 24 words take 4 spreads. And you see the final and the original version. This is only 24 or 25 words of the book, and all of these significant changes were made for a reason, whether it's giving the characters, the kids, more action, moving the story forward, considering the sound out loud, considering what's going to be in the illustrations and leaving more room for an illustrator. You can see how many words in a 24-word selection changed over the course of revision. So I think that the reason editors say they don't like rhyme is because they see a lot of rhyme that isn't polished. And I think it's important to polish it. And then the last rule that I want to say just doesn't really exist is that concept books that lack plot or named characters are hard to sell. And I've sold several of these. I'm giving you several examples right here that will be in your bibliography. And I think that concept books are easy to sell if they have a very, very clear concept and they're very, very tightly written. Most concept books that I know are well under the 500-word mark. They're simple in their idea. They're not simple in how much work went into them, but they're very simple. And I have a link to ProKid Writer. It's just prokidwriter.com/conceptbooks. That sort of explains maybe what a concept book is. And then my examples here are All the World by Liz Barton Scanlon. Wherever You Go, which is not out yet, but it is coming out. It's by Pat Zitlaw Miller. And Green by Laura Vaccaro Seeger. I think Green probably has like 30 words in it, or less, maybe even. That just explores all the different colors of green, and yet in its exploration has sort of a nice, tidy storyline at the end of it, or a message, so to speak. And so these are concept books that, you can see 2 of them right there have Caldecott stickers on them. They were either a winner or an honor book. And I think that having a clear concept, you can sell that as a picture book if you're really tight with your writing and it's just written very well. Okay, I skipped the final activity about writing 1 sentence for your picture book, and if we have time, we'll get back to, doing that. But I just think that it's really important that you're tight, that you really write 1 sentence, have a clear, fresh concept, and go from there with your picture book as you revise, is stick to that concept. And if you're straying, that can really damage your manuscript. So this is just my contact me. It's always a website. You can go to mirandapaul.com/contact, and you can contact me there anytime. I also run the site called Rate Your Story. And if you want to connect with me regarding diverse books, We Need Diverse Books, I have a separate email for that. You can go right on the We Need Diverse Books website and you click, contact through there, or you can use miranda@diversebooks.org for that. But feel free to contact me through my site if you want. And I'm happy to answer questions if and when I can. I will try to get back to people as I can.